The blood had barely dried on the pristine marble floors of the Baccarat Hotel when Dante Russo stepped over the third body without breaking stride. His Oxford shoes, custom-made, Italian leather, worth more than most people's monthly rent, left no trace in the crimson pool spreading across the checkerboard pattern. Behind him, the string quartet had long stopped playing Vivaldi. The Grand Salon, once dripping with crystal chandeliers and $100 white roses imported from Ecuador, now reeked of gunpowder and copper and something darker, the metallic tang of death that Dante had grown intimately familiar with over 2 decades of navigating the blood-soaked underworld of New York's most powerful crime syndicate. He adjusted his bespoke Brioni cuffs, the mother-of-pearl cufflinks catching the fractured light from the shattered chandeliers above. The crystals had rained down like deadly confetti during the initial exchange of gunfire, littering the marble floor with sharp-edged diamonds that crunched beneath his feet with every measured step. His dark hair was immaculate, not a strand out of place, styled with the kind of precision that required a personal groomer and 45 minutes of careful attention every morning. His charcoal 3-piece suit bore not a single wrinkle, not a single speck of blood, despite the fact that he had personally put down 2 of the 4 attackers with shots that had found their marks with surgical precision. He looked less like a man who had just survived an assassination attempt, and more like a CEO stepping out of a boardroom meeting after closing a particularly profitable deal. That was the thing about Dante Russo. He never looked ruffled, never looked threatened, never looked anything other than utterly, terrifyingly in control. It was a carefully cultivated image, one that had taken him years to perfect, and it was the primary reason he had survived this long in a world where weakness was punished with swift and brutal finality. His gaze, however, those pale gray eyes that had made lesser men weep and stronger men beg on their knees, was anything but corporate. They swept across the ballroom with predatory precision, cataloging every detail with the kind of ruthless efficiency that came from years of surviving assassination attempts, betrayals, and the endless, grinding violence that was simply the cost of doing business at the highest levels of organized crime. For shooters in tactical gear, dispatched with surgical efficiency by Dante and his personal security detail, their bodies lay sprawled among the scattered champagne flutes and crushed rose petals, their blood seeping into the Persian rug that had cost more than most people's houses. The surviving guests had been herded into a corner by his men, their faces pale with terror, their jewels and designer gowns now absurdly out of place against the backdrop of violence. The cream of New York society, hedge fund managers, tech billionaires, socialites who had never known a day of real hardship in their lives, huddled together like frightened sheep, their carefully cultivated masks of sophistication crumbling in the face of raw, brutal reality. Dante's men stood guard over them, their weapons still drawn, their faces impassive masks of professional detachment. Dante's nostrils flared slightly, catching something beneath the gunpowder, an expensive perfume, and the metallic scent of fresh blood. Omega. The scent was faint, almost masked by the chaos of the attack, but unmistakable to an alpha of his caliber. Vanilla and amber, with an undertone of something sharper. Fear, yes, but also defiance, a stubborn refusal to submit that made Dante's instincts prick up with interest. It came from the service alcove behind the heavy oak doors, where the catering staff had been hiding during the attack. He knew that scent. He'd caught it 3 days ago at the Pierre Hotel, during a charity function that had been meticulously planned by Kolankawi Lifestyles. A certain event coordinator had been cross-referencing the guest list with a little too much attention to detail, his eyes moving too quickly, his posture too alert for someone who was supposed to be nothing more than a party planner. The man had been wearing a cheap suit that didn't quite fit him right, and an expression of professional boredom that didn't quite reach his eyes. But those eyes, those striking green eyes that seemed to see right through everything, had been cataloging exits, analyzing security patterns, doing everything except what a catering coordinator was supposed to be doing. Dante had filed that information away. He always did. It was what had kept him alive for 34 years in a world where trust was a luxury and betrayal was the only constant. Now, as his enforcer Marco materialized from the shadows and dragged a slender figure out of the alcove, Dante felt his suspicions crystallize into rock-solid certainty. "Found this one hiding in the pantry, boss," Marco rumbled. His massive hand clamped around the man's arm like a steel trap, his thick fingers digging into the delicate flesh with casual brutality. The enforcer was built like a refrigerator, all broad shoulders and thick neck and hands that could crush a man's throat with minimal effort. Trembling like a leaf. "Thought he could sneak out through the kitchen, but I caught him before he made it to the service exit." The man stumbled forward, catching himself before he fell. His Louboutin heels, Dante noticed them immediately, the red soles unmistakable even in the dim light of the ruined ballroom, skidded on the blood-slicked marble. He didn't scream. He didn't cry. He didn't beg for mercy or offer excuses or do any of the things that Dante had come to expect from people caught in compromising positions. Instead, he simply lifted his chin and met Dante's gaze with those defiant green eyes. Liam Donovan, 28 years old, senior event coordinator for Colin Cowie Lifestyles. At least, that was what his employment record said, what his carefully crafted cover identity had been designed to project to the world. The file was meticulous, filled with the kind of mundane details that made a cover story convincing. A childhood in suburban Connecticut, a degree in hospitality management from Cornell, a series of increasingly prestigious jobs in the event planning industry. Dante knew better. He'd had his people run a deep background check the moment he'd noticed the man's two careful observations at the Pierre. The employment history was a masterfully crafted forgery, but there were cracks, small inconsistencies that only someone looking for them would find. A credit card that didn't match the salary. A phone number that routed through a secure government server. A scent that didn't belong to any ordinary civilian. The Omega was suppressing it. Dante could tell from the slight tension in his shoulders, the controlled breathing, the way his hands were clenched at his sides. The effort was making the scent stronger, more concentrated, flooding the air around them with that intoxicating combination of vanilla and amber that made Dante's alpha instincts roar with possessive hunger. Mine, something primal whispered in the back of his mind. Claim him. Take him. Make him yours. Dante crushed the impulse with the iron control that had served him so well over the years. He couldn't afford to lose his head over a pretty face and an enticing scent, no matter how compelling the combination might be. "You saw everything," Dante stated. It wasn't a question. Liam's jaw tightened. His scent spiked, that vanilla and amber growing sharper, more pronounced, laced with something that smelled like citrus and fire. But his voice remained remarkably steady when he spoke. "I saw nothing. I'm just the event coordinator. I want no part of this." The lie was delivered with such conviction, such practiced ease, that a lesser man might have believed it. Dante wasn't a lesser man. He'd been lied to by experts, had spent years perfecting his ability to detect deception in all its forms, and the Omega's performance was good. Very good, even, but not quite good enough. "I know what you are, Liam," Dante murmured, low enough that only the Omega could hear. The name rolled off his tongue like a caress, intimate and possessive and deliberately unsettling. "I've known since the Pierre." Liam's composure cracked, just slightly. His green eyes widened, just a fraction, and his scent wavered, surprise, fear, and something else, something that sent a bolt of heat straight to Dante's gut. Something that smelled like curiosity, like attraction, like the kind of forbidden desire that made Dante's blood run hot in his veins. "Matteo, we need to leave." Arthur Pendleton stepped forward, playing the part of the loyal lieutenant with practiced ease. He'd been a fixture at Dante's side for 5 years, trusted with everything, treated like a brother in everything but blood. His dark hair was slicked back with expensive gel, his suit immaculate, his expression one of carefully calibrated concern. "The cops are here. Let Marco handle the boy." He's a liability. Dante's eyes flicked to Arthur, and something cold settled in his chest like a stone. The man's scent was wrong, too eager, too aggressive, laced with something that smelled like triumph rather than genuine concern. His posture was off, his shoulders too squared, his gaze too calculating. He wanted the Omega dead. Wanted him gone quickly, before he could say anything, before he could reveal whatever he had seen. Dante's instincts, honed over decades in this blood-soaked world, screamed that something was very, very wrong. "Arthur," Dante said, his voice soft and dangerous, "step back." Arthur's expression flickered, surprise, then something that looked like fear, quickly suppressed. "Boss, we don't have time for this. The NYPD is seconds away from swarming this place. We need to." I said step back. Dante's voice didn't raise, didn't change in pitch, but the menace in it was unmistakable. The air around him seemed to grow colder, heavier, thick with the kind of barely restrained violence that had made his reputation. Arthur's jaw tightened. He stepped back. The heavy ballroom doors swung open, and NYPD Captain Morrison stormed in with a dozen heavily armed SWAT officers. Their weapons were drawn, their faces grim, their body language screaming barely contained hostility. "Weapons down. Nobody moves." Morrison barked, his voice echoing through the cavernous room. His eyes swept the carnage before landing on Dante, and his expression twisted with barely concealed hatred. "Russo, I should have known. You're coming with us." "On what charge, Captain?" Dante asked smoothly, raising his hands in a placating gesture, his expression one of wounded innocence. "I was merely attending a charity function when these men opened fire. I am a victim here. I am just as traumatized as everyone else in this room." Morrison's lip curled in disgust. "You're a victim? You're a plague on this city, Russo. You and your whole rotten organization. Now, Captain, that's not very charitable of you. The Asta Foundation does wonderful work for underprivileged children. I'm sure they'd be very disappointed to hear such harsh words from a public servant." Dante's tone was mild, almost conversational, but his eyes were anything but. They were fixed on Morrison with the kind of predatory intensity that made lesser men break out in cold sweats. Morrison's gaze shifted, landing on Liam still standing rigidly between Dante and Marco. "And who is this? A hostage? One of your victims?" Arthur stepped closer to Dante, lowering his voice to a furious whisper. "Give him to the cops. Or let Marco deal with him out back. If he talks, if he tells them what he saw." Dante silenced Arthur with a single glance. Then he moved. In a fluid motion that defied every expectation, Dante closed the distance between himself and Liam. He didn't grab the Omega violently. Instead, his hand cupped the back of Liam's neck, his thumb pressing against the racing pulse point beneath the Omega's jaw. The contact sent an electric shock up his arm, a spark of something primal and possessive that made his alpha instincts howl with approval. Liam's entire body stiffened. His sense spiked wildly. Fear and confusion, and something that tasted like white-hot anger. But he didn't pull away. He didn't struggle. He just stood there, those green eyes blazing with fury and something else, something that looked like the first stirrings of reluctant surrender. "He is not a hostage, Captain," Dante said, correcting himself smoothly. His voice carried effortlessly across the silent ballroom. "He's with me." Morrison's hand rested on his holster. "Then who is he? Some kind of criminal associate?" "He is my fiancé," Dante declared. "Liam Russo. He's here with me tonight. We're attending the gala together." The words hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. Liam's breath caught, his green eyes widening with shock and fury. His scent flared, vanilla and amber laced with something that smelled like ozone, like the charged air before a thunderstorm. He opened his mouth, presumably to protest, to deny, to call Dante out on his outrageous lie. But before he could say anything, before Morrison could question, Dante leaned in. His lips hovered mere millimeters from Liam's ear, and he breathed one word against the Omega's flushed skin. "Trust me." Then he kissed him. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't kind. It wasn't any of the things that a polite society might consider appropriate for a public display of affection. It was a brand, a claim, a declaration of ownership that echoed through the silent ballroom like a gunshot. Dante's mouth claimed Liam's with possessive hunger, his free hand sliding around the Omega's slender waist, pulling him flush against his chest until there was no space left between them. Nothing but the heat of their bodies and the electricity crackling in the air between them. Liam gasped against his lips, and Dante tasted it. That vanilla and amber, now flooding through the Omega's system, thick and heady and intoxicating. The sound the Omega made was soft and broken, a desperate little whimper that sent a bolt of pure fire straight to Dante's groin. He felt Liam's hands come up to push against his chest, but Dante didn't budge. His arm tightened around the Omega's waist, his fingers tangling in Liam's dark hair, and for 5 agonizing, electrifying seconds, the world dissolved into the scent of expensive cologne, gunpowder, and raw, undeniable want. When Dante finally pulled back, Liam's lips were swollen, his cheeks flushed, his green eyes wide with shock, and something that looked terrifyingly like surrender. His scent was a chaos of conflicting emotions, desire and fear, anger and arousal, everything all mixed together in a heady cocktail that made Dante's head spin. Dante turned back to Morrison, tucking Liam securely against his side, one arm wrapped possessively around the Omega's waist. "My fiancé and I have had a very traumatic evening, Captain. My lawyers at Sullivan Cromwell will be in touch in the morning to discuss the proper compensation for this unfortunate incident." His smile was sharp as a blade. "Good night." The armored Maybach sliced through the rain-slicked streets of Manhattan like a black shark through dark water, its engine a low, throaty purr that barely registered above the sound of the rain hammering against the reinforced windows. The city lights blurred past, streaks of gold and red and white that reflected off the wet asphalt and painted shifting patterns across the interior of the soundproof cabin. Inside, the silence was suffocating. Liam sat as far away from Dante as the leather bench would allow, pressed against the door like he was trying to disappear through it. His hands were clenched in his lap, his knuckles white, his breathing still uneven from the adrenaline and shock and the lingering aftershocks of that devastating kiss. The city lights flickered across Dante's face, highlighting the sharp, unforgiving angles of his jaw, the high cheekbones, the aristocratic nose that had been broken at least twice and reset with brutal efficiency by the family's personal physician. Dante was scrolling through a secure encrypted tablet, seemingly ignoring Liam entirely. His expression was calm, almost bored, like he hadn't just forced a stranger into a fake engagement and dragged him into the middle of a bloody gang war. But Liam knew better. He could feel Dante's attention on him, a weight, a pressure, a predatory awareness that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. The alpha's scent was everywhere in the enclosed space, cedar and dark whiskey, with an undertone of something dangerous, something that smelled like smoke and steel and the kind of violence that left scars on the soul. It was overwhelming, intoxicating, impossible to escape. He's an alpha. He's dangerous. He's the enemy. But his traitorous Omega instincts purred with approval at the proximity of such a powerful, virile male. The bond was already forming, already taking root in the primitive part of his brain that had never quite evolved past the basic biological imperative to find a strong alpha and submit. Liam was a federal agent. Special Agent Liam Donovan, Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, operating under a joint task force with the FBI. For 8 months, he'd been embedded in high society, tracing a $40 million money laundering pipeline that led directly through the Visconti Russo syndicate. He'd attended countless galas, infiltrated countless private parties, built relationships with the kind of people who thought of money as an abstraction and power as a birthright. His handler, Special Agent Marcus Webb, had given him strict orders. Observe, copy the ledgers, do not engage. The Bureau had been building this case for 2 years, and Liam's role was supposed to be a supporting one, gathering evidence from the periphery, staying out of the line of fire, letting the more experienced agents handle the heavy lifting. Now he was sitting in the back of a bulletproof car with the head of the syndicate, having just been forcibly drafted as his fake fiancé to save him from a treacherous lieutenant. If Dante found out he was a federal agent, a bullet to the head would be the merciful option. The Alpha would probably take his time, savoring the Omega's terror before. No, he couldn't think like that. He was a trained operative. He had survived worse situations. He could survive this too. You're thinking so loudly. It's giving me a headache, Dante murmured, not looking up from his tablet. Liam stiffened, his heart lurching in his chest. I'm thinking about how I'm going to explain to my boss why I left a multi-million-dollar gala in the company of a suspected crime boss. Dante chuckled, a dark, rich sound that vibrated through the cabin and settled somewhere deep in Liam's chest, sending an unwelcome shiver of pleasure down his spine. He set the tablet aside and turned his head, those pale gray eyes fixing on Liam with unsettling intensity. Your boss at the catering company? Or your boss at the FBI? The air vanished from Liam's lungs. His heart slammed against his ribs like a trapped bird, and for a moment, he genuinely thought he might be sick. But years of training kicked in, years of learning to control his reactions, to project calm when every instinct screamed for him to run. How? His voice cracked, and he cleared his throat, forcing himself to continue. How do you know that? Dante's smile was slow and devastating, the kind of smile that had probably broken hearts and emptied bank accounts with equal efficiency. I know a lot of things, Liam. It's my job to know things. And I've known about you since the moment you walked into the Pierre Hotel and started cataloging my security arrangements like you were planning an extraction, not planning a party. Liam's jaw tightened. I don't know what you're talking about. Please. You didn't flinch when the shooting started. When Marco grabbed you, you didn't scream. You checked my perimeter, analyzed my men's positions, calculated the exits. You have government training written all over you. Dante leaned forward, and his scent intensified, cedar and whiskey, dangerous and intoxicating and impossible to resist. I knew the moment I saw you cross-referencing the guest list at the Pierre. The way you moved, the way you watched, the way you cataloged everything in that pretty head of yours. If you think I'm a federal agent, why am I alive? Liam demanded, dropping the terrified civilian act. His voice was sharp, angry, entirely too loud for the confined space of the Maybach. But he was past caring about caution, past caring about the rules that had governed his entire undercover operation. Why didn't you just kill me and be done with it? Because right now, we have a mutual problem. Dante's voice was calm, reasonable, like he was explaining a business transaction rather than discussing matters of life and death. Arthur Pendleton, your lieutenant. Liam spat the word like a curse. The one who orchestrated tonight's hit. Exactly. Dante's approval was a warm brush against Liam's frayed nerves, an unexpected bomb that made the Omega want to lean into the Alpha's space despite every instinct screaming at him to maintain distance. He thought he could take me out and use you as the scapegoat. If I had left you with the police, Arthur's men in the precinct would have killed you in a holding cell before morning. He's been planning this for months, maybe longer. He has allies in the commission, supporters among the families. He's been building his power base while pretending to be my loyal lieutenant. So you kissed me. Liam's voice was bitter, laced with the kind of resentment that only came from feeling thoroughly, completely out of control. You claimed me, made me untouchable. I made you protected, Dante corrected smoothly. In my world, what is mine is defended by the full wrath of the Russo family. Arthur cannot touch you now without starting a civil war, and he isn't ready to fight that battle. Not yet. Not without more support than he currently has. Lucky me. Liam crossed his arms over his chest, a defensive gesture that did nothing to hide his vulnerability. And what happens to me now? Once Arthur is dealt with, I mean. What happens to your convenient fake fiancé? Dante's eyes darkened, the pale gray deepening to something that looked almost like hunger. You play the role. You stay by my side. You sleep in my bed. And in exchange, I let you live long enough to take down Arthur with me. That's not much of a deal. Liam's voice was shaking, just slightly, despite his best efforts to control it. What's to stop you from killing me once Arthur is dead? Nothing. Dante's honesty was brutal, unflinching. But I'm not going to kill you, Liam. You're far more useful to me alive than dead. And besides, his voice dropped to something that was almost a purr. I like having you around. Your scent is intriguing. Liam's cheeks flushed, the heat spreading down his neck and chest. I don't sleep with targets, Russo. Sweetheart. Dante's voice dropped to a gravelly whisper, the endearment dripping with mockery. You don't have a choice. You're an Omega, and I'm an Alpha, and if you think the federal government is going to protect you from what's coming, you're even more naive than I thought. The Maybach pulled into the subterranean garage of a luxury fortress in Tribeca, the underground parking structure a labyrinth of security cameras, reinforced concrete, and armored vehicles. 443 Greenwich Street, famous for housing celebrities and billionaires who craved extreme privacy and security, a fortress designed to keep out the world and all its messy complications. Marco opened the door, his eyes lingering on Liam with deep suspicion, his hand hovering near his shoulder holster in a way that was clearly meant to intimidate. Boss, we need to talk. Later, Marco. Dante's voice brooked no argument. Sweep the perimeter. Double the security rotation downstairs. I want eyes on every entrance and exit. And the Omega? Marco's voice was flat, unimpressed. What should we do with him? He comes with me. Dante's hand closed around Liam's arm, firm and unyielding. He stays in my suite. He doesn't leave my sight. Marco's jaw tightened, his eyes blazing with barely contained hostility. Boss, with all due respect, I didn't ask for your opinion, Marco. Dante's voice lashed out like a whip, cold and sharp and dangerous. I gave you an order. Follow it. Marco clamped his jaw shut, gave a stiff nod, and disappeared down the hall, his heavy footsteps echoing in the silence. Dante led Liam to a private elevator that opened directly into a sprawling 6,000-square-foot penthouse. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a sweeping panoramic view of the Hudson River, the water glittering darkly in the night. The decor was aggressively masculine. Dark walnut, brushed steel, black leather, and millions of dollars in modern art that hung on the walls like trophies. Liam stood in the center of the living room, feeling entirely out of his depth. His designer suit, borrowed, like everything else in his undercover life, felt like a costume, a mask that was slowly slipping away. He was an Omega in an Alpha's den, hunted and helpless and utterly alone. Dante walked to a crystal decanter and poured 2 glasses of Macallan 25, the amber liquid catching the light like liquid gold. He walked back to Liam, extending 1 glass. When Liam didn't take it, he set it on the table beside him, his fingers lingering on the crystal for just a moment longer than necessary. I said you are sleeping beside me, Dante said, stepping into Liam's personal space until there was barely a breath of air between them. His scent was overwhelming this close, cedar and whiskey, and something darker that made Liam's knees feel weak. I never said you had to sleep with me, though I imagine keeping your hands to yourself will be a challenge. Liam slapped his hand away, the one that had been reaching toward his cheek, fingers brushing against his flushed skin. Your arrogance is astounding. It's not arrogance if it's a fact. Dante leaned in closer, his gray eyes flicking down to Liam's lips, lingering there with obvious intent. Arthur is watching. My men are watching. If they suspect for a second that this is a sham, you're dead. You need to convince them that you are utterly, irrevocably obsessed with me. I am a trained operative, Liam said, refusing to back down. His chin was tilted defiantly, his green eyes blazing with a fire that made Dante's breath catch. I can fake anything. Dante's lips curved into a wicked, devastating smile that made Liam's heart stutter in his chest. We'll see about that, Liam. The bedroom is down the hall on the right. You have 10 minutes to get ready. And don't try the panic room. The biometric scanners only respond to my retina. As Dante walked away, Leaving Liam standing in the dimly lit penthouse, the Omega realized with a sinking dread that he wasn't just an undercover agent anymore. He was the property of a Mafia king, claimed and possessed, and bound in ways he was only beginning to understand. And the most dangerous part wasn't the assassins waiting outside, or the traitor plotting revenge, or the agency that had sold him out. It was the undeniable, treacherous heat stirring in his own blood whenever Dante looked at him. The master bedroom of the penthouse was a study in intimidating luxury. Charcoal silk walls that absorbed the light, creating an atmosphere of shadowed intimacy. A custom California king bed draped in 1,000 thread-count fret linens, the sheets so soft they felt like water against the skin. A wall of reinforced glass overlooking the glittering Manhattan skyline, the city lights painting shifting patterns across the ceiling. Liam stood by the window, wearing a borrowed white button-down shirt that smelled intoxicatingly of cedar and Dante Russo. The shirt was too big for him, the shoulders slipping down, the hem falling to mid-thigh. It was intimate in a way that made his skin prickle, wearing the alpha's clothes, being surrounded by his scent. Behind him, the en-suite bathroom door clicked open. Dante stepped out, shirtless, a towel slung low on his hips. The harsh overhead lighting caught the intricate map of scars across his sculpted chest and abdomen, souvenirs of a life built on violence. A body that had been broken and rebuilt countless times. Water dripped from his dark hair, trailing down the sharp planes of his stomach, disappearing beneath the towel. His muscles were defined, corded with the kind of strength that came from years of brutal training and survival. Liam's breath caught in his throat. His body responded before his mind could catch up, his Omega instincts purring with approval at the sight of such a powerful, virile male. He's an alpha. He's dangerous. He's the enemy. But his traitorous body didn't care about any of that. It only cared about the heat pooling low in his belly, the way his nipples tightened beneath the borrowed shirt, the way his thighs pressed together in a futile attempt to relieve the sudden ache between them. "You can take the bed," Dante said, walking toward a mahogany wardrobe. He tossed a heavy silk duvet onto a low leather chaise lounge in the corner, the fabric whispering against the polished leather. "I don't sleep much anyway. I thought the point was to convince your men we were inseparable." Liam's voice was steadier than he felt, a small miracle given the way his heart was racing. He crossed his arms over his chest, an unconscious defensive gesture that did nothing to hide his vulnerability. Dante paused, turning slowly. The predatory grace in his movements made the hairs on the back of Liam's neck stand up. "Are you inviting me into that bed, Liam? I'm establishing the parameters of our arrangement." Liam's voice lacked its usual icy precision, wavering at the edges. "If Marco walks in, Marco knows better than to open my bedroom door without knocking. Unless he wants to lose a hand." Dante's voice was soft, almost gentle, in stark contrast to the violence of his words. He walked over to Liam, closing the distance until the heat radiating from his skin enveloped the Omega. He reached out, his thumb tracing the delicate line of Liam's jaw, feather-light and achingly tender. "But if you insist on making this authentic." Before Liam could protest, before he could even breathe, Dante swept him off his feet. Liam gasped, instinctively wrapping his arms around Dante's thick neck as the alpha carried him to the massive bed and dropped him onto the mattress. The springs barely shifted as Dante climbed in beside him, pulling the heavy sheets over them both. The alpha's body was a furnace of heat beside him, his scent surrounding Liam like a cocoon. "Sleep, agent," Dante murmured, clicking off the bedside lamp and plunging the room into darkness. "Tomorrow, we go to war." Liam lay rigid in the dark, acutely aware of the dangerous, powerful alpha lying inches away. He expected Dante to try something, to use his position, his scent, his dominance to intimidate him further, to push the boundaries of their arrangement. Instead, within minutes, Dante's breathing slowed to a deep, rhythmic cadence. The alpha was asleep, truly asleep, his body relaxed and vulnerable in a way that spoke of either supreme confidence or absolute trust. He trusted Liam enough to sleep with his back exposed. That realization was far more dangerous to Liam's composure than any physical threat. The next morning, the penthouse was a hive of controlled chaos. Liam emerged from the bedroom wearing a sleek, tailored Armani blazer and slacks that Dante's private shopper had delivered at dawn. The clothes fit him perfectly, as if they'd been made for him, and that small courtesy filled him with a complicated mix of gratitude and resentment. The jacket emphasized his narrow waist, the slacks hugged his hips, and the silk shirt beneath was so soft it felt like a caress against his skin. In the living room, Dante stood at the head of a massive marble dining table, flanked by Marco and 3 other heavily armed men. Spread across the table were blueprints of a building that Liam recognized immediately. The Amon, New York, the ultra-exclusive hotel in the Crown Building, one of the most secure private venues in the city. Arthur called a meeting of the Syndicate Commission for tonight at the Amon. Dante was saying, his voice a low, lethal hum. He wore a navy Tom Ford 3-piece suit that fit his powerful frame like a second skin, looking every inch the billionaire kingpin. He's going to make his move. He'll tell the commission that I've grown weak, that I brought a federal rat into our inner circle, and that I need to be removed. He has the votes, boss, Marco grunted, his face grim. The Lucchese and Calabrese heads are backing him. The Genovese family is neutral, but they won't stand against a united front. We walk in there, it's a firing squad. What about the Gambinos? Dante asked, his voice calm. Where do they stand? Undecided. They're waiting to see which way the wind blows. Marco's expression was sour. They'll support the winner, whoever that turns out to be. Liam stepped into the room, drawing every eye. Marco's hand subtly drifted toward his shoulder holster, but Dante silenced him with a sharp look that could have frozen fire. We go to the meeting, Liam said, his voice clear and commanding. The room went dead silent. Marco scoffed, his lip curling with contempt. And why should we listen to a cop? Why should we trust anything he says? Because I have something Arthur doesn't know about. Liam pulled a small encrypted flash drive from his pocket, holding it up so everyone could see. The drive was unremarkable, just a standard black USB, but what was on it was worth $40 million and countless lives. He looked directly at Dante, his green eyes blazing with fierce determination. Before my handler put me under cover, I intercepted a data stream from a Cayman Islands server routing through Butterfield Bank. Arthur hasn't just been plotting a coup. He's been skimming from the commission's offshore accounts for 3 years. $40 million, Dante. The evidence is all on this drive. Dante's eyes narrowed, a dangerous, calculating light sparking in his pale gray irises. Can you prove it? If I can get access to the secure terminal in the Amon's private boardroom, I can project his bank ledgers onto the screens before he even opens his mouth. The data is time-stamped, authenticated, impossible to fake. The commission will see the truth, and Arthur will have no way to deny it. Assuming he lets you get that far, Marco muttered. Assuming we don't all get shot the moment we walk through the door. That's a risk we'll have to take. Dante's voice was cold, decisive. The alternative is doing nothing and waiting for Arthur to strike first. I've never been the type to wait for my enemies to make the first move. Suddenly, Liam's burner phone buzzed in his pocket. He knew that number. It was the secure line to his handler, Special Agent Marcus Webb, the man who had recruited him into the task force, trained him, and promised to protect him. He glanced at the screen, his blood running cold. Webb was calling. Webb was calling now, at the worst possible moment, in front of the most dangerous men in New York. Dante noticed the shift in his demeanor, the way his sense spiked with sudden fear. Answer it, he ordered. Put it on speaker. Liam hesitated, his fingers trembling around the phone. Every instinct screamed at him to hang up, to throw the phone out the window, to do anything except follow the Alpha's command. But Dante's eyes were fixed on him, pale gray and unyielding, and Liam knew that disobeying would be the end of whatever fragile trust had been built between them. He tapped the screen and set it on the marble table. Liam, thank God. Webb's frantic voice echoed in the room, tinny and distorted through the phone's speaker. The task force is pulling the plug. We know you're with Russo. You need to listen to me carefully. You need to get out of there right now. Leave the ledgers on the server, go to the extraction point, and let Arthur Pendleton handle Russo tonight. Liam's stomach dropped, a cold wave of nausea washing over him. How do you know Arthur is making a move tonight, Webb? That intel isn't on any FBI wire. That's not something the Bureau has access to. Silence stretched over the line. A heavy, damning silence that seemed to go on for hours. Webb, Liam said, his voice dropping to a whisper, hard and cold, and filled with dawning horror. You're on Arthur's payroll. You sold me out. You sold the entire operation out. Liam, don't be stupid. Webb snapped, his tone turning vicious, all pretense of concern gone. Russo is a dead man walking. Arthur is paying us double what the Bureau does to look the other way. If you stand by Russo tonight, I will burn your credentials. You'll be labeled a rogue agent. You will go down with him, and no one will come to save you. Do you understand me? No one. Dante leaned over the table, his face inches from the phone. Agent Webb, he said, his voice laced with venomous calm that was somehow more terrifying than any shout could have been. If I were you, I would start running. Because when I am finished with Arthur tonight, I am coming for you. I will find you. I will make you regret ever touching what belongs to me. Dante crushed the phone beneath the heel of his Oxford shoe, shattering the glass and cutting the connection. The pieces scattered across the marble floor like broken dreams. Liam stared at the shattered fragments, his chest tight, his heart pounding so hard he could hear the blood rushing in his ears. His career was over. His agency had betrayed him. His handler had sold him out for money, for the kind of cash that came with selling one's soul to the devil. He was completely cut off, trapped in the underworld with no lifeline, no allies, no one to turn to. Dante stepped around the table and stood before him. He reached out, his warm hands gripping Liam's shoulders, grounding him in the present, pulling him back from the edge of the panic attack that was threatening to consume him. You have no one left, Liam, Dante said, his voice surprisingly gentle. Only me. Liam looked up into his eyes, seeing the ruthless truth reflected there, but also something else, something that looked almost like care, like concern, like the beginning of something that neither of them had expected. Then we better not miss tonight, Liam said, his voice steady despite the chaos inside him. The private subterranean boardroom of the Almond, New York smelled of expensive cigars, aged bourbon, and impending violence. The 5 heads of the syndicate commission sat around a massive obsidian table, their faces shadowed and grim, their eyes sharp with suspicion. Each man was a king in his own right, ruling over his own territory, his own family, his own empire of blood and corruption. They had come together tonight to judge one of their own, to decide whether Dante Russo was still worthy of his place at the table. At the far end stood Arthur Pendleton, looking smug and victorious, his expression one of barely concealed triumph. He wore a bespoke suit that cost more than most people's cars, his dark hair slicked back, his smile sharp as a knife. When the heavy oak doors swung open, the room fell dead silent. Dante Russo walked in with the casual, terrifying confidence of a panther entering a cage of lesser predators. His step was unhurried, his expression calm, his posture radiating the kind of dominance that came from knowing, absolutely and completely, that he was the most dangerous man in the room. His hand was firmly secured around Liam's waist, pulling him flush against his side. Liam wore a backless crimson silk shirt that left a trail of fire in his wake, paired with black slacks that hugged his hips and accentuated the elegant line of his legs. His dark hair was styled with casual perfection, his green eyes lined with just a touch of shadow that made them look even more striking. He looked less like a federal agent and more like the ruthless consort of a dark empire, a man who had chosen the darkness and made it his own. You have a lot of nerve showing your face here, Dante. Arthur sneered, gesturing to the armed guards lining the walls. And you brought the Fed with you. You've insulted the commission for the last time. This is a private meeting, not a circus. Sit down, Arthur. Dante's voice echoed in the cavernous room, cold and commanding. He didn't look at his treacherous lieutenant. Instead, he addressed the 5 crime bosses directly, his gaze sweeping across their faces. Gentlemen, Arthur has called you here to accuse me of treason. He claims my fiancé is an undercover agent and that I am compromised, that I've betrayed the family, sold our secrets to the feds, turned my back on everything we've built. Isn't he? Demanded Don Lucchese, the oldest man at the table, his roomy eyes sharp with suspicion. Isn't he a federal agent, Dante? Because if he is, if you've brought an informant into our midst, the penalty for that is death. You know that. You've enforced it yourself. He is a man who possesses a very specific set of skills, Dante said smoothly, pulling out a chair for Liam. Skills that have uncovered a rat in our house. And it isn't him. Liam didn't sit. Instead, he smoothly slid the encrypted drive from his clutch and plugged it into the boardroom's central console. His fingers flew across the glass keyboard, bypassing the hotel's security firewall with frightening speed, his training kicking in despite the terror coursing through his veins. Stop him, Arthur barked, drawing his weapon. Before he could raise it, Marco and Dante's men had their SIG Sours drawn and aimed directly at Arthur's head. The room erupted into chaos, men shouting, weapons drawn, the tension so thick it was almost visible. Let the boy finish, Don Russo rumbled, waving a hand. His voice was calm, the voice of a man who had seen it all and was no longer impressed by displays of violence. I want to see what he has to show us. Liam hit the final keystroke. The massive digital screens lining the boardroom walls flared to life. Rows and rows of banking data, offshore routing numbers, and shell company names illuminated the dark room, the numbers and figures scrolling past in a dizzying cascade of information. What you are looking at, Liam announced, his voice echoing with absolute authority, is the private ledger of Arthur Pendleton, specifically his accounts at Butterfield Bank in the Cayman Islands. Over the last 36 months, he has diverted $40 million from the commission's shipping revenues into his own pockets. He bought FBI agents to cover his tracks and orchestrated a hit on Dante to seize control before the audit. The proof is all here, right in front of you. The room erupted. The mob bosses stared at the screens, their expressions morphing from skepticism to shock to murderous rage. Don Lucchese's face went purple with fury. Don Calabrese slammed his fist on the table, rattling the crystal glasses. The air was thick with the scent of anger and betrayal. Arthur's face drained of all color, his smug confidence evaporating in an instant. It's a lie. He fabricated the data. He's a Fed. He set me up. This is all a setup. The routing numbers are live, Arthur. Dante stepped slowly toward his former friend, his voice soft and deadly. The commission can verify them right now. The accounts are real, the transfers are real, and your betrayal is real. Don Russo pulled a sleek Philippe Patek phone from his pocket, dialing a number, speaking rapidly in Italian. His eyes locked on the screen, watching the numbers scroll past. A moment later, he hung up and looked at Arthur with cold, dead eyes. The accounts are real, Russo stated, his voice flat. The money is there. All of it. You've been stealing from us for years, Arthur. You've been plotting against us, selling us out, positioning yourself to take over when the dust settled. Arthur panicked. His eyes wild with desperation, he lunged toward the door, his hand reaching for his weapon. But Marco's massive frame blocked the exit, his weapon already drawn, his expression one of grim satisfaction. Arthur raised his gun, aiming wildly at Liam, his finger tightening on the trigger. I'll kill you, you fucking bitch. A single, deafening gunshot shattered the tension. Arthur's eyes went wide, his body jerking backward. The gun slipped from his hand, clattering against the marble floor. A dark bloom of crimson spread across his chest, staining his expensive suit a deep, spreading red. He collapsed backward, his body hitting the floor with a heavy thud, dead before he hit the ground. Liam flinched, the ringing in his ears disorienting him. For a moment, all he could see was the blood spreading across the marble floor, the same kind of scene he'd witnessed at the Baccarat Hotel, the same kind of violence that had shattered his world. He looked to his right. Dante stood there, his suppressed Beretta still raised, smoke curling from the barrel. His eyes were locked on Arthur's body, devoid of any remorse, any regret, any hint of the man who had once called Arthur his brother. He had executed the man who had been like a brother to him without a second of hesitation, without any indication that the act had cost him anything. Dante holstered his weapon and turned to the commission. The debt is settled. The stolen money will be routed back into the syndicate's central accounts by morning. Arthur's allies will be dealt with in the coming days. The threat is over. Don Russo nodded slowly, a sign of ultimate respect from a man who had been in the game longer than Dante had been alive. You have handled your house, Dante. The commission is satisfied. And the boy? His eyes shifted to Liam, evaluating him with cold, assessing gaze. Dante turned his gaze to Liam. The coldness vanished from his expression, replaced by a possessive, burning heat that made the Omega's breath hitch and his heart race. He walked across the room, ignoring the blood on the floor, and stopped inches from him. He is not a federal agent anymore, Dante declared, his voice rough with emotion he rarely showed. He is Liam Russo, my fiancé, my mate, and anyone who questions his loyalty again will answer to me. He reached out, his hand sliding to the nape of Liam's neck, tangling in his dark hair, the touch possessive and claiming. Without waiting for a response, right there in a room filled with the most dangerous men in the city, surrounded by the scent of gunpowder and death, Dante crashed his lips down on Liam's. This kiss was different from the one at the hotel. It wasn't a desperate act of survival, a calculated move to protect Liam from Arthur's machinations. It was a promise, a claiming, a declaration of ownership and devotion that left no room for doubt. It was Dante taking Liam's body and soul, claiming him in front of the most powerful men in the New York underworld. Liam surrendered to it, his hands gripping the lapels of Dante's suit, kissing him back with a fierce, reckless hunger that surprised them both. The FBI had abandoned him. His handler had sold him out. But the Mafia king had moved heaven and earth to protect him, and somewhere in the chaos, Liam had found something he hadn't even known he was looking for. Later that night, back in the silence of the Tribeca penthouse, Liam stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the city lights bleed into the dark waters of the Hudson. The rain had stopped, leaving the air clean and fresh, and the stars were just beginning to emerge through the clearing clouds. Dante came up behind him, wrapping his arms around his waist and pulling him back against his solid chest. The alpha's warmth seeped through Liam's borrowed shirt, and he felt himself relaxing into the embrace despite every instinct that told him to stay on guard. Webb is gone, Dante murmured against his ear, his lips brushing the sensitive skin. My men found his apartment empty. He's on the run, probably already out of the country by now. He knows what happens to people who cross me. He'll keep running, Liam said softly, leaning into Dante's embrace. He's a survivor. He'll find somewhere to hide, somewhere I'll never be able to find him. He'll start over with a new identity, new money, new everything. Dante turned him around in his arms, those pale gray eyes tracing the contours of his face with an intensity that made Liam's breath catch. And what about you, Liam? Do you want to run? I can give you a new identity, a new life anywhere in the world. You could disappear, start over, leave all of this behind. His thumb traced the delicate line of Liam's jaw. You don't have to stay in this darkness. You don't have to stay with me. Liam looked at the ruthless, beautiful alpha who had shattered his reality and rebuilt it in his own image. He reached up, tracing the faint scar along Dante's jawline, feeling the warmth of the alpha's skin beneath his fingertips. I don't want a new life, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I don't want to run. I want you. Dante's eyes darkened with raw, unfiltered desire, the pale gray deepening to something that looked almost like hunger. Say it again. I want you, Dante. Liam's voice was fierce, certain, without a shadow of doubt. I've wanted you since the moment you kissed me at the hotel, since the moment you claimed me in front of everyone. Maybe even before that, when I first saw you at the pier. I thought it was just my Omega instincts, just biology, but it's more than that. It's you. It's always been you. Dante groaned, a low, possessive sound that vibrated through Liam's entire body. You're mine, Liam. Do you understand that? You're mine now, and no one, not the FBI, not the Commission, not anyone, is ever going to take you from me. You belong to me. I'm yours, Liam agreed, his heart finally accepting the truth he'd been fighting since the moment Dante first claimed him. I've been yours since the beginning. I just didn't want to admit it. Dante swept him up into his arms, carrying him toward the bedroom. No more pretending. No more games. The fake engagement was over, and the real reign had just begun. Dante laid him on the massive bed, covering his body with his own. The alpha's scent was overwhelming, cedar and whiskey, dark and possessive, and everything Liam had never known he needed. The weight of him was grounding, the heat of him a comfort, and Liam wrapped his arms around Dante's neck, pulling him closer. I love you, Dante breathed against his lips. I know it's too soon. I know we've known each other for barely a week, but I've never felt this way about anyone, and I can't. Neither have I, Liam interrupted, pulling him down for another kiss. I love you too. I don't know how it happened, but I do. I love you, Dante. I love you. Dante's kiss was fierce, demanding, and impossibly tender all at once. His hands roamed over Liam's body, mapping every curve, every plane, every sensitive spot that made the Omega gasp and arch beneath him. He explored Liam like he was memorizing him, cataloging every sigh and moan and desperate whimper. Let me claim you, Dante whispered, his lips trailing down Liam's throat, pausing at the sensitive spot where his scent gland was most prominent. Let me bite you. Let me make you mine in every way that matters, forever. I want to wake up every morning knowing you're mine, knowing no one can ever take you from me. Liam's breath caught. A claiming bite was permanent. It would bind them together for life, two souls inextricably linked, their scents forever intertwined. There was no going back from a claiming bite. It was the most sacred bond an Alpha and Omega could share. Yes, he breathed, his voice trembling with emotion. Yes, Dante, claim me. I want to be yours. I want everyone to know I'm yours. Dante's fangs descended, and when they sank into the tender flesh of Liam's throat, the Omega cried out, not in pain, but in a pleasure so overwhelming it nearly consumed him. The bond slammed into place with the force of a tidal wave, a golden thread connecting their souls, and Liam felt everything. Dante's love, his fear, his desperate, consuming need. And beneath it all, a fierce, unwavering devotion that took his breath away. I love you, Dante murmured against his skin, licking the wound closed. Forever. You're mine forever, Liam. Nothing will ever change that. Forever, Liam agreed, pulling him into another kiss. I love you, Dante. I love you so much it scares me. Their bodies moved together, finding a rhythm that was both fierce and tender. The world outside the penthouse, the violence, the betrayal, the bloodshed, faded into nothing, leaving only the two of them, tangled in each other's arms, lost in the overwhelming intensity of their bond. When it was over, Liam lay in Dante's arms, his body sated and his heart full. The Alpha's scent surrounded him, warm and protective, and everything he'd never known he needed. His throat throbbed with the new claiming mark, a constant reminder of his new bond, his new life. Thank you, Liam whispered, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on Dante's chest. For saving me, for trusting me, for loving me. Dante pressed a kiss to his forehead, his lips lingering there for a long moment. Always, Liam. You're my fated mate. I would burn the world down for you. Liam smiled, a soft, genuine expression that made Dante's heart ache. I would burn the world down for you too. But preferably we can keep the burning to a minimum. Dante laughed, a warm, genuine sound that vibrated against Liam's skin. Deal. Now sleep, darling. We have a long life ahead of us. Liam nestled closer, burying his face in the curve of Dante's neck. The Alpha's arms tightened around him, and for the first time in months, Liam felt safe. He was no longer a federal agent, no longer an undercover operative playing a dangerous game. He was Liam Russo, mated to the most powerful Alpha in New York, loved and protected and cherished. It wasn't the life he'd planned. It wasn't the life anyone would have chosen. But as Dante's lips pressed a soft kiss to his temple, Liam knew with absolute certainty that it was the life he was meant to live. The weeks that followed were a blur of adjustment and discovery. Liam learned to navigate the world of the Russo family, learning the intricate dynamics of the syndicate, the unspoken rules of loyalty and power. He met Dante's inner circle, the men who had been with him since the beginning, the ones who had survived countless betrayals and battles. Some of them accepted him immediately, recognizing the bond between him and Dante as something sacred and unbreakable. Others took longer to warm up, their suspicion of feds and outsiders deeply ingrained. But Dante was patient. He introduced Liam slowly, carefully, always at his side, always with his hand on the small of Liam's back or his arm around the Omega's waist. He made it clear that Liam was his, that anyone who disrespected Liam disrespected him, and that disrespect would be met with swift and brutal consequences. Slowly, the family came to accept Liam. They saw the way he looked at Dante, the way he supported him, the way he brought out a softer side of the ruthless Alpha that none of them had ever seen before. They saw the way Dante softened around Liam, the way his cold eyes warmed when they landed on his Omega. And Dante, for his part, was determined to make Liam happy. He bought him whatever he wanted, clothes, jewelry, art, anything that caught Liam's eye. He took him to the finest restaurants, introduced him to the best of everything New York had to offer. But what mattered most to Liam wasn't the expensive gifts or the lavish lifestyle. It was the small things, the way Dante would brush his hair back from his forehead in the mornings, the way he would pull Liam close in his sleep, the way he would whisper, "I love you," in the dark, thinking Liam was already asleep. Liam found himself falling deeper and deeper in love every day. The bond between them grew stronger, their sense intertwining until it was impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. They were partners in every sense of the word, a team against the world. But the world wasn't done testing them. 6 weeks after Arthur's death, a new threat emerged. A rival organization from the West Coast, led by a ruthless Alpha named Viktor Volkov, saw an opportunity in the chaos that followed Arthur's betrayal. They began moving into Russo territory, testing the borders, probing for weakness. Dante had to go to war again. Liam watched from the penthouse as Dante prepared for battle, his heart heavy with worry. He knew the dangers of this world, the violence that was an inescapable part of Dante's life. But he also knew that he couldn't stop Dante from doing what needed to be done. It was who he was, and Liam loved him for it. "Come with me," Dante said one evening, pulling Liam into his arms. "I need you by my side. I need to know you're safe." "The penthouse is safe," Liam protested. "It's a fortress. No one can get in." "I don't care." Dante's voice was fierce, his gray eyes burning with intensity. "I need you with me. I can't focus on the battle if I'm worried about you. I need to know you're close, that I can protect you if something goes wrong." Liam looked into his Alpha's eyes and saw the fear there, the desperate need to keep him safe. Dante Russo, the most feared man in New York, was afraid of losing him. "Okay," Liam agreed, pressing a kiss to Dante's lips. "I'll come with you. I'll stay by your side." The battle was brutal. Viktor Volkov's men were vicious, well-armed, and willing to die for their cause. The fighting lasted for hours, the streets of Brooklyn running red with blood. But Dante was a force of nature. His men fought with savage determination, fueled by loyalty and the knowledge that defeat meant death. And at the center of it all was Dante, ruthless and brilliant, orchestrating the battle with the kind of strategic genius that had made him legendary. Liam watched from the sidelines, his heart in his throat. He saw Dante take down 3 men with surgical precision, his movements fluid and deadly. He saw Marco fight with the strength of 10 men, his massive fists crushing bones and breaking skulls. And when it was over, when Viktor Volkov lay dead at Dante's feet, the war was won. Dante crossed the battlefield, his clothes splattered with blood, his eyes wild with adrenaline. He pulled Liam into his arms, crushing him against his chest. "It's over," he breathed, his voice shaking with relief. "It's finally over." Liam wrapped his arms around him, holding him tight. "I love you," he whispered. "I was so scared. I love you too." Dante pulled back, his hands cupping Liam's face. "I will never let anyone hurt you. I promise." That night, in the quiet of their penthouse, Dante knelt in front of Liam. "I know we already have a bond," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I know we're already mated. But I want to do this properly. I want to give you everything, Liam. I want to spend the rest of my life making you happy." He pulled out a small velvet box, opening it to reveal a stunning ring, a flawless diamond set in platinum, surrounded by smaller stones that sparkled in the dim light. "Liam Donovan, will you marry me?" Liam's eyes filled with tears. He dropped to his knees in front of Dante, wrapping his arms around the alpha's neck. "Yes," he whispered. "Yes, Dante. I'll marry you. I'll spend the rest of my life with you." Dante slid the ring onto Liam's finger, his hands trembling with emotion. Then he kissed Liam, soft and sweet and full of promise. "I love you," he murmured against his lips. "Forever." "Forever," Liam agreed. "We have a whole lifetime ahead of us." And they did. A lifetime of love and laughter, of battles won and challenges overcome. A lifetime of building an empire together, of creating something lasting and meaningful. Liam had come to the underworld as an undercover agent, sent to destroy everything Dante had built. Instead, he had found his soulmate, his partner, his everything. Sometimes the greatest betrayals lead to the greatest loves.